3, 4.
Welcome to Off Panel from Sketch.com. This week, we're doing a live podcast from Emerald City ComiCon as I stare deeply into Josh Williamson's eyes.
Yeah, man, it's romantic.
It's very
Early
romantic.
morning, he brought me coffee.
I get my dream of doing the Sketched Fist Club, which is my title for breakfast interviews. But anyway, so we're here to talk about Nailbiter, Birthright, The Flash, all kinds of stuff.
Comic books.
Comic books, you know. But I want to start with, it seems... Josh, when was your first like big published work?
Oh man, that's a tough question. I mean, I started publishing comics, like self-publishing comics, like 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's tough, man. I feel like Ghosted was probably one of the bigger books. And that's not.
I think that was the first thing I read of yours.
Well, I mean, at that point, it actually was really funny. I saw this article recently where somebody was talking about me writing The Flash, and they were like, "Oh, it's Josh's first DC work," and I was like, "Oh, buddy, you don't even know. Like, I wrote for DC on a regular for like 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's just I wasn't doing anything anybody cared about. I think is the best way to put it. I did a book called Necessary Evil. That was like my first like in diamond mass produced, out there comic, and it was going through Desperado, and that got picked up by Cartoon Network.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that happened, then I started getting more and more attention. And I had already been talking to people because I'd been doing self-publishing and going to cons. But then after that, it was this gradual flow of these little things. So I talk to people sometimes about the process of breaking in, and I'm like, when you actually do break in, you don't realize it until way later.
Right.
I think because when you do break in, you're so busy, you don't have time to like celebrate. You're not stopping and going, I did it. Like you just sort of keep working.
Yeah, you were talking about like, what was it, 56 scripts?
Yeah, 2014, I wrote 56 scripts. Wrote and was paid for 56 scripts.
56 scripts, where are you going to have the time to just be like, am I breaking in yet? Is that happening?
Yeah, at that point, I mean, that was the year that Nailbiter came out. That was the year that Birthright came out. I was working on the Predator stuff for Dark Horse. I was in Captain Midnight. Like, there was a lot of stuff. I was still writing Ghosted, which I sometimes forget about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was doing so much stuff. I mean, I still love Ghosted, but it's like I forget.
Yeah.
Those are the new things that were coming in. There was stuff that I was working on already regularly. And I'm probably leaving things out. Like, there was just so much.
Well, I mean, you get so busy, you don't even, like, you're really just thinking in the present right then. You're thinking about, like, what's happening next with Birthright, what's happening next with Nailbiter.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have to admit something. This is, I was going to save this for later.
You can tell me whatever you want.
It's a horrible admission. I never read Nailbiter until this week.
Oh.
Exclusively because the first cover horrified me so much.
I hear that all the time. I hear it all the time.
I used to have actual dreams about people biting my nails, and it was horrifying.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, do you chew your nails? Because I chew nails.
No, I don't.
Like crazy.
I don't.
Yeah, I chew my nails like a maniac. So does I found out. So does Snyder, and so does Jamie McKelvey. Like we all chew our nails.
Really?
Yeah. Scott is in some ways worse than me, but I feel like it's like two sides of the same coin in terms of chewing our nails.
So, anyway, I finally read it. I read the first volume, which it was on like a Comixology sale or something like that. So I picked up the first volume, and it was awesome. I loved it,
man.
And it was funny because I was just like, I was somehow imagining like the first scene where you first meet. God, I forgot the Nailbiter's name.
Oh, Warren.
Warren, yeah. When you first meet Warren, and I'm like, oh God, I really hope this entire book is not just nail biting. And then I read it, and I was like, holy shit, this is like really fantastic.
Yeah, we didn't want to do gore stuff. We wanted to be much more like psychological and fun. I mean, the way I write it is I try to write it as like a Penny Dreadful sort of thing, where it's very like, it's very pulpy and fun and loose and not too gory, but just enough of that. And I want to keep snapping my fingers right now if you can't hear it, but I try to keep it very quickly paced. What's crazy is I didn't even realize this until the other day, and I thought it might happen, but the story arc we're working on right now that launches in May, it's called Bound by Blood. That entire story arc, like 5 issues, take place over 24 hours.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't set out to do that, but as I was writing and plotting, I started realizing it, and I was like, well, we'll see what happens when I'm scripting. By the time I started writing issue 4, or 24, which is the 4th issue of that arc, I was like, oh yeah, this is definitely 24 hours. Like, barely that. Like, there's time jumps in the first issue that get you to, like, nighttime.
Right.
But pretty much the entire arc takes place over the space of, like, one night, like sunset to sunrise, just because of how fast-paced we try to keep things.
So one thing I want to ask you about, though, is like, you got Nailbiter, and you got, like, the whole, like, the Butcher storyline where it's, like, the premise of serial killers all in this one town, the Buckaroo, Oregon. And then you have like, Birthright is like the family that was separated, and the kid who goes to Terranos and is living in this like, evil Narnia like land.
That's
and
exactly what it is. Yeah.
And then comes back and is like, you think he's just like, doing one thing and he's doing something completely different. And then like the Flash, you got like the Barry Allen is training the next generation of speedsters and everything like that. I'm really curious as to like when you're writing, are you thinking from a premise to start, or how much do you bake into there from like the beginning?
Man, I guess it really depends. I think with Nailbiter, I think I let off with the premise, and I knew there were things I wanted to do. Like I try to think of the visual, I try to think what I want to see in page turns, and I start there and I kind of start working around it.
Right.
With Birthright has been a lot harder to write. I think Birthright still is the hardest book to write because it's so much world building and so much. I think that premise changed so many times over the years. I actually came up with that idea so long ago that it's just like gradually evolved. That one is definitely more premise based and more about like the theme. It's like everything has to be about the family, right? And it's very much like there's this couple scenes in the next arc that are very like, if I gave it to a different artist and told them don't draw any of the fantasy stuff, just the family stuff,
it
would be a very family drama.
Right.
Like we're taking the family drama and dumping it in there, and so that's where I lead off from there. With the Flash is interesting to me because there's already so much mythology there that's based up for me to work from.
Right.
It's what's actually a little. I don't want to say it's easy, but it's easier to write than those, and that's one thing about the double shipping for me. It hasn't been as much because it's like, it's another book of the Flash a month. But I'm not changing gears.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I think if I was writing 4 books, and every week I had to write a different book, which is normally what I do.
Right.
Each week you're changing gears, right? And then if you get notes or an editor emails you, you're like, oh man, I got to start over. Or I got to do this. You got to switch your brain off and turn it to different books. With the Flash, even though it's 40 pages a month instead of 20, I just don't change gears. You just keep working on that one. With him, I don't know, I feel like I relate a lot to Barry Allen. Surprisingly, like
Was it because you were struck by lightning and had chemical spill over you?
The chemical spill,
speed?
Definitely, yeah. Not the super speed, though, I wish. Even though I do write quickly, thankfully, which has been a godsend lately. When I was a kid, I was really into The Flash, and I think I came in right at the right time of comics. I was already reading comics. I've been reading comics my whole life, but I was reading DC. When you start going to the store every Wednesday, right around the time when they were like, oh, here's Tim Drake.
Right.
Oh, here's Connell.
Oh, yeah.
And then here's Bart Allen, right? And so I'm a kid when this is going on, and the character I related to the most in that time period was Bart Allen, because I was a kid who was a hyper kid, who was running around, a little troublemaker. And so I think I just related so much to Bart Allen in that time period. I even had his hair. Like, I kept trying to get his hair.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, seriously, I have pictures. Like, I had this crazy, like, mop top because I really wanted to have his hair. Unsuccessfully. It's not the gravity is not your friend if you're trying to get Bart Allen's hair.
I was going to say, I think when Humberto Ramos draws his hair, that's one thing, but then reality, it just crushes it down.
Exactly, yeah. So I had that most of middle school. It was horrible. My mom actually sent me a picture recently, and I saw it, and I was like, oh, God.
That's amazing.
Unrelated. She didn't know that was that same time period. But when I was a kid, I was really into Bart Allen, and I really related to him. And then when I was in my 20s, was when Geoff started writing. And I was reading The Flash straight through. This whole time I've been reading it like nonstop. Then you get around to like my 20s, and that's when like late teens, early 20s is when Geoff took over. And I'd already been reading Wally, but I think at that time period I started relating more and more to Wally, right? Like also most of my 20s I was always very, with Wally. And I was in that camp of like, for me, Barry Allen, and I think our generation of readers, like, the most we know of Barry Allen at that time was that he died.
Right, exactly.
Like that is our experience of Barry Allen. That's what we know about him. There's almost a weird sainthood to him.
Yeah, he was the martyr, the one who saved him or saved everyone by running around the anti-monitors like crazy engine. And
I have read that scene a lot lately.
Nice.
I have read a lot of Flash comics, man. Let me tell you. Like literally a lot of Flash comics. And I still go back and read stuff for reference, and I check things, and I'm always like, trying to make sure I'm not doing something somebody's already done before. But anyway, but there was a moment, and I think it was around the time before 52 when, he brought him back, and I was reading him, and I started really relating more and more to Barry. And then you get posts, because when during Geoff's run during Rebirth, the second time around, he was very like the Flash Rebirth, the first one. Barry was still that savior grandpa character.
Right.
So there's a lot of weight on him. And then when you move into what we have now, he's not that anymore. He's not the savior, he's not grandpa right now.
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
He's like, police, kind of like he is in the TV show a lot. I mean, going back to his roots and everything.
And so there's a moment where I started relating a lot to him because I'm a workaholic, like straight up. And I think all superheroes are workaholics, right? That's why they have the problem of the superhero and the personal life.
Yeah. Batman is definitely the most ultimate workaholic.
Yes, they all have it. They all have it on some level. I mean, they could all sit down. It's really funny if all the Justice League ever had like an actual like pizza party, and Batman started being all woe is me about relationships, they would all have the same conversation. They would all just be like, "Listen, Bats, you're not alone, dude.
Yeah.
It isn't just you. We
We're all
all have
there.
this
We're all
problem.
there."
None of us have personal lives. Are you kidding me? The whole thing of like, I think with the Flash, and it's a Spider-Man thing, but I apply it with all superheroes. Is Spider-Man wins, Peter Parker loses. Right? That's like the rule.
Right.
I feel that way about all superheroes, really, but especially Barry Allen. But for me, that's where I start. To get back to your question, that's where I start off with is Barry Allen. I think about how I relate to Barry and how Barry is always trying to do a lot of things at once, and and that's how I am. Like I'm always doing probably a little bit more than I should, which is actually part of when I started working on the Flash. And it's interesting as I'm working on it and I'm thinking about this all the time. You start like I'm learning from it,
right?
Like I'm being very like I should slow down. I should do this. I actually was talking to my editor one time when we were talking about a couple scenes that felt rushed. And I was like, are you telling me to slow down right now? Are you talking to me like I'm Barry Allen? And that was one thing I told this to we were at the Rebirth event, and we were in the back, and I was talking to Geoff and Steve Orlando and Tom King. We were all just talking about how, the secrets, right? And for me, like, I started working on The Flash back in the fall. Like, I really did pitch it last summer, and Dan said no. But I was like, okay, cool. That's the only thing I want to do. I only want to write The Flash. I don't want to do anything else.
Right.
And then we came back around October, and I was like, hey, so I have, this is what I'm thinking. And, I took what he had said, the things he didn't like about it, and I'm like, here's my solutions. And he was like, oh, you turned the strengths into weaknesses. I love it. But from that point forward, I was like, I actually don't want to jinx this. And I think so much gets leaked nowadays.
Right.
I'm telling nobody.
Right.
And so I was like literally having to like lie to friends about what I was working on for 6 months or whatever.
Were you just saying like nothing and then running away, basically?
Yeah, pretty much. No, I actually like just never hung out with anybody. I like didn't go to any parties. I didn't do anything, and I was just working. But at the same time, it was because I really wanted to do the work, and I really wanted to make it good. And not to say you can't do both, but for me, I was just like, oh, I don't want to ruin this. I don't want to jinx it.
Right.
I'm just gonna not tell anybody.
Yeah.
And we got all the way until it never got leaked, and I was probably working out longer than anybody, and it never got leaked. It never was a problem. And I was telling those guys, I was like, I felt like there was a moment toward the ending when it was getting closer and closer that I felt like this is gonna sound really silly, but you have those moments where you're like, I am the Flash, because it was that whole idea of relating to him, because I'm like, oh, I have to lie to my friends and family because I don't want anybody, and my family too, because I don't want them to like tell one member of my family and they post it on my Facebook like, hey, congratulations. And I'm like, well, that's out now.
Yeah.
So I wasn't telling anybody what I was working on. And so I had this whole thing of like having this secret identity of not telling people what I was doing for a long time, and it was a big deal. It was hard not telling people. People would come in like, what are you working on today? I'm like, oh, comic books. Yeah, just writing. This was going on, I would have friends who would find out from other people and then be like, so what's going on with that? I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I would apologize. I'm like, I'm sorry I lied to you. But it was very much those moments. But so I'll get back to your question. Barry Allen, I start with that. Yeah. I start with the relating to him and what I would do in these situations. And when I'm confronted with this concept that we were doing that is so big, what would I do in Barry's case? And that's where I kind of go from there.
I have to say you do a much better job with your secret than Barry Allen himself does, or at least in the TV show, because like everybody knows.
I don't know how it's not public yet. It's such a weird thing. I mean, they tell people pretty quickly. We actually reveal he tells two people in my run. Spoilers. He tells two people in my run. Yeah. And one of them I feel like is natural, and there's another one that I've been working on to make it feel natural. Like it's a struggle because it's one that I think is important to do, and it's an important moment for him as a character. But I think people will probably be surprised by it. But it's also the thing too is you want it to be a surprise, but you want it to be natural. Right. Yeah. Because if the audience is like, well, they're building to this thing, then it's not a surprise as much. Right. But if it's something that does come out of left field, I'm curious what people are going to think about it. I think it's one of my favorite parts of the comic.
Right.
I don't know. I'm really excited about when I went down to Burbank a few months ago to have another meeting about the scripts, and I was already pretty far, and to meet with Geoff and talk about where things were. And, but I'd already written a lot. There was a moment where we were like talking about everything, and we're just going over like we had all the scripts laid on the table. We're going over everything, and then I was like, "So guys, what did you guys think about this part?" And they were like, "Oh, it's cute," and I was like, "Perfect. That's all I needed to hear." Cute. That is like the best answer.
Nice. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing who it is. But one thing you said in there I thought was really interesting because it's like, like one of the big things they've been talking about with Rebirth is like the legacy. And the Flash almost above all is like, besides maybe Batman, is like a legacy character.
Well, he's the one that for a long time, Wally was the one that became. He fulfilled the goal.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And even Bart became the Flash very briefly. But at the same time, it's really interesting though because you were talking about how your personal evolution with the character, it's kind of matched your life. Like when you were young, you were totally into Bart Allen, then you like started to understand Wally, and then now you're seeing yourself in Barry, and I think that's a really interesting statement on the characters in that your own like interest in the characters has kind of matched their like stories, which is really fascinating. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think about this as I'm working on it. It took me a while to realize that because I knew somebody had asked me. It was before I got the job. Somebody asked me who my favorite Flash was. And at that point, I was like, "Oh, Barry Allen." But then I knew why. I wasn't just like, "Oh, this is it," blah blah blah. I feel like you go to people and they're like, "Who's your favorite superhero?" And they're like, "Batman." I'm like, "No, who's your real favorite superhero?"
Yeah.
Like, come on, listen, we all love Batman. Give me the answer. But at that point, I knew why. And it was because of that. I knew that it who knows, when I get to be like in my 60s, I might be like, Jay Garrick. Like, he's my favorite. Or Max Mercury or whatever. Yeah. Oh, no, I'm on it, dude. It's so funny. Like, yeah, people ask me on it's so weird. People come to me and they're just like, "Hey, are you going to use this character? This is who they are." And they tell me who they are. And I just want to be like, please.
Come on now.
Like, I know who they are.
I'm writing The Flash for DC Comics. I think I know who Max Mercury is.
I went back and I started from the beginning, right? So I went back to Showcase 4 and I just started reading
Oh, you went
everything.
real beginning.
Yeah, dude, I read everything.
Damn.
I knew a lot of it, but the thing is, there's a difference between knowing things, remembering things, And,
yeah.
And I've been reading Flash since a little before Return of Barry Allen regularly.
Sure.
You read Flash comics, you read superpowers, you read things. When I was a kid, I was always getting like weird random comics. I wasn't so much of a like, we got to get this monthly until around Death of Superman, and then I started getting. Actually, no, that's not true. I would say around the first Batman movie was when it was like, oh, there's numbers. I need to get these in numbers.
Right.
And then so I started going to the store regularly around when Batman Returns came out. Have I ever told you anything about Batman Returns?
No.
Can we talk about this?
No.
Oh, man. So when I was a kid, Batman Returns comes out. And I was already huge into, superheroes at this point. Already huge into Batman.
Batman was your favorite character.
Yeah, exactly, right? Super into Batman, super into Green Arrow. I knew stuff, right? And so then that summer of 92, so we got out of school, go see Batman Returns. And as we're waiting in line, there's a sign, and there's actually a comic book store opening up next door to the movie theater. And they have a sign that says, if you bring your ticket stub to Batman Returns, you get a free $1 comic.
Oh, man.
Which at that time, $1 comic is basically a comic, right? You weren't
yeah.
getting like the cheap stuff. You were getting a comic. And so we went and saw it. I loved it. I was like, this is the greatest movie of all time. It's perfect for my 12-year-old mind. I still love it. And so after the movie was over, we walked over and I had my ticket stub. My parents gave me their ticket stubs. And so I got like $3 comics. And I was like, this is the greatest scam of all time. So then I'm
just going to keep seeing it over and over.
Dude, I saw Batman Returns in the theater 17 times. And every time the movie was over, what I would do is I would wait until the lights went up.
Yeah.
And then I would quickly walk up and down the aisles, and I would collect the ticket stubs off the ground, like anyone I could find, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you find one. Hey, that's a free comic.
Yeah.
Right? So I got there, and I would walk in there like a pile.
That is amazing.
And I would walk out with like a stack of comics. Yeah, Batman Returns.
That is hilarious.
So that time period is when I started getting things weekly. And so I was reading at that point, because that's the same year that like the animated series starts off. And then a lot of stuff was kind of gearing up with DC. I think a lot of the 90s stuff that we kind of think about was actually starting around then. Because Death of Superman is not long after that, and Reign of Superman, and then Nightfall is right around the same time. Like all this stuff sort of starts building. And that's when I started going like, oh, I'm going to go to the store every week now.
Right.
So that's really when you start thinking about, okay, so now we're talking about right before, Return of Barry Allen. Mm-hmm. So for me, I remembered a lot of that stuff.
Right.
And so when I started getting this job, I was like, I'm gonna read everything again. And I went back and I started reading, and some of the stuff I knew, like I had read Showcase 4 before,
Right.
I went back, started reading Showcase 4 and going all the way through. And it was interesting when I got around, as I could feel myself getting closer and closer to Return of Barry Allen, and then getting Return of Barry Allen, which is, as much as it's about Wally, it's also about Barry, because I feel like Barry cast such a big shadow.
Yeah, the legacy.
You had to reestablish all that for the reader. So it's very much a Barry story on top of being a Wally story. And it was kind of interesting reading all these things again that I read when I was like 11, 12 years old, and kind of going back through and being like, man, I remember this stuff really well, and like going through it. And then some things I completely forgot about. Like there's a part right after Return of Barry Allen where they do a crossover. It's not a crossover, but basically Nightwing and Starfire guest star. I totally forgot about Nightwing and Starfire being together until I got to that. And I was like, oh, they were almost married, and then they didn't get married because like Raven broke it up.
They were like the star-crossed lovers.
Dude, that was a weird. I completely blanked on that. I was actually talking to Andy Corey. I saw him and I was like, "Do you remember that?" And he was like, "Hell yeah, that was a big thing." We started talking about it.
Yeah, they even touched on like Infinite Crisis, I think, randomly.
Dude, yeah, like that was a big thing at the time. I completely forgot about it, and then I was going through and reading it all. And I'm in Geoff's run now in my complete reread. And it's very interesting. It's like a time capsule. You kind of remember reading. Oh, I remember reading this and what was going on at the time. When I was reading it, but yeah, man, I read a lot of Flash comics recently. But some people will come to me and they'll just be like, "So what do you think about this character?" And they'll tell me the character's origin, and I'm like,
"You're like, thank you for the information.
Yeah,
I will take it under consideration."
I know. I've been reading a lot of Flash comics. It's all right.
So, actually, I want to say, I actually we saw Scotty Young earlier, and I talked to him about this before. Weirdly, like I feel like the '90s have kind of gotten this, like there's obviously a stigma to the '90s given like what happened during that period. And everything.
I think people take the economic problems of it and they attach the economic problems to the creative aspect of it.
And it was a really good time for DC in particular. You look at like you talk about like the Tim Drake Batman. You talk about Chuck Dixon and Scott McDaniel on Nightwing was an awesome book.
Yep.
Like Stars and Stripe with Jeff. You talk about
that's much later though.
Oh, that was much later. I know.
I think that might even be 99.
I think
2000.
it was like, yeah. I mean, it was definitely much later, but like just that whole period for like the young characters and everything like that. And like the first Flash comic I really remember reading was Terminal Velocity.
Oh man, I have a copy of the trade signed by Mark Waid.
I do too.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah. So I'm gonna go to a free comic book store. I'm gonna show it to him and be like, "Look, he signed this for me when I was like 14 years old." Don't feel old.
I had him sign it for me when I was like 26 at Emerald City ComiCon.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm from Alaska. We don't get to see people like Mark Waid very often.
Yeah, that's funny.
Anyways, but yeah, that was my first comic, or my first Flash comic, and or the first one I really remember. And I just remember like that kind of had like everything in it. Like it had Max Mercury really being introduced, and it had Bart Allen really kind of making his presence felt, and it really tied in like the Linda Park and Wally West relationship.
Yeah, and Linda being not the damsel in distress.
She was so badass.
Yeah,
like she was the one who was like rallying the troops to go against
Cobra.
I was going to say Hydra, and I was like, wrong company. Okay, so I want to get back to your creator-owned stuff because one thing I think is really interesting about creator-owned books is like, for like a book like Nailbiter and for a book like Birthright, like especially in today's era, it's like it's a really competitive market. And like, even though you're a Skybound who has like an awesome team behind it and everything like that, you like. I think I see Frank Barbieri use this term a lot, like the hustle. Like the hustle is an important thing for creator-owned comics. Like, what do you do for like trying to get those books out to audiences? Like, are you big on like retailer outreach and promotion and stuff
mostly
like that?
retailer, I feel like. You have to. We were talking about before. I've been doing this for 15 years. I built a lot of contacts, and a lot of people I can email, and people I know. So it's like I'm able to kind of just send stuff to them or talk to them or get their opinion about it or get things in front of them. Like that's pretty much all you do. I mean, really, when you're doing a creator-owned book, even with Birthright, I think and Birthright does have a lot of support,
right?
And Nailbiter does too. I mean, a lot of people at Image are very, very helpful. But even doing an Image book, it is like starting a small business. Like every time you're doing a book, that person is starting a small business,
right?
And so you have to think of it like that. If you're running a small business, how would you do this? And those same steps you would do to do that, you need to do with that comic. Like it is interesting when I talk to other creators about the business of comics and that particular aspect of the business of comics. And you can tell they just don't know it works that way.
Right.
You know, it is a small business. You really have to get out there in front of people. There's a good chance you're not going to make money on it. There's all these things. You could be the biggest name out there, and it can still crash and bomb.
Yeah.
You know, you have to be, and especially if you're not in front of it.
Right.
You know, there are times where books will come out, and I'll be like, I had no idea this was even coming out.
Yeah.
And I pay attention. Like, I get previews. You know, every month I still buy previews. I still sit there and we talked about this on Twitter, right? Yeah, I still get previews. I flip through it, and it is interesting when I'm going through it. I'm like, oh man, this book is not either. I didn't hear about it. The only reason why I know about this book is because I get previews.
Right.
I don't think that's a good sign.
No.
You know, or then I'll read the preview solicitation, and I'm like, oh God, people, come on.
Well, and it is interesting, like, I'm not saying that, like, Image is some sort of saintly organization or something like that, but at the same time, when you look at other publishers, like, Dynamite released a book, like, a few months ago from, like, a big name creator.
I know what you're talking about.
And I didn't even hear about it until after it came out. I heard about it, you know, Big Bang Comics?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So I was following their weekly comic analysis.
And they were talking about it.
And they were talking
how
about
it didn't sell.
And I was just like, I didn't even know it came out.
You know what, though? There's also... not to bash that book, because I like everyone. I actually really like the creators on that book.
Oh, I'm definitely not bashing or anything.
But I think that there's also a thing about timed releases.
Sure.
Right. There's a thing about controlling the flow of it. And it's actually always my concern about anytime I can tell a book is undercooked or is not ready to go. Like, no book should be announced if it's not going to be out within a certain amount of months. Like, within 6 months' time. It should not be coming out.
Right.
Right. Or at least in that calendar year.
Yeah.
And that's my personal opinion, because I feel like you are basically burning some of that excitement off in that time period, because you're going to have to like re-announce it.
Right.
We got really lucky with Nailbiter, and that we announced it in January at Image Expo 2014, and then it came out in May. So it was in previews like really quickly after that.
Right.
We were able to get out there.
So you had the momentum you could work off
of it. And you have to sort of keep that in mind when you're doing these things. And I think that's the thing with Image right now, and with those creators, and that particular book was that sort of happened with that.
Right.
You know, and I did think that happens on some books. You have to be able to control it. We did Comics Pro. You know Comics Pro.
Yeah,
right?
I was actually gonna bring that up here in a
Okay,
second.
yeah. So I went to I go to Comics Pro, and I sit there and we talk with the retailers, and I talk with other creators. And it is interesting every year, or at least the last 2 years, we've had a creator table where creators can sit and talk with retailers and ask questions and sort of get an idea of, you know, things. And there's always like, I don't know, people listen to this, they might get upset. There's always one creator at the table that like walks away from that table like mind blown.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how do you not know this?
No, I mean, that's completely legit, because I think a lot of people don't think about that stuff. That's one of the things that I've found while doing my podcast is like I've had people email me and be like, I'm learning, like people who'd been working in comics for a while, and they said that they are learning things they never knew. And like I'm happy to do that, but at the same time, it is surprising when you see things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm different. I mean, you know, I started working at a comic store when I was 14.
Right.
You know, so I was
That
in
makes
a
a huge
store,
difference.
Yeah, from 14 to around 24. So it really was like a 10-year time span of my life. I worked at 3 different stores, and I would do jobs in between. I was going to school, the whole, you know, all that stuff at the same time. But like my perspective, I think, on comics is very different than people. Like when I'm coming up with an idea for a comic, I'm not thinking about it just as a creator. I'm thinking about it also as a retailer. Like, if I'm at the counter, how am I going to sell this?
Right.
And I feel like if a creator doesn't come from that perspective, or at least don't put thought into it,
right,
that will hurt them long term. And so I'm always very on top of it. I remember when I was like 22, I was working at this comic book store, and CrossGen was coming out, and CrossGen was doing all this promotional stuff and all this retailer outreach. At the time, CrossGen was like, as much as CrossGen was a nightmare, there were things they were trying that were different, that I think everyone does now. And a lot of it was some of the retailer outreach stuff. And so they were doing all this stuff with retailers. And I remember it was a Wednesday morning, we're putting the books up, I'm talking to the owner of the store, and I was like, hey, so CrossGen is doing all this stuff, and I was telling him about it. And he stops, he looks at me, and he goes, it's scary to me how much you know about this business. Because I think it's actually kind of dangerous, and I'm annoyed by it. And I was like, I don't know how to respond to any of that. But I feel like that's how it is. I have a couple of, maybe I shouldn't tell this story. Sometimes I don't really talk a lot online about stuff. I don't really talk about the business. I don't really get too deep online.
Yeah.
But I'll have friends that when things kind of hit the fan for them, I will sit down with them and be like, you want to hear the truth? Let's talk about it.
Right.
You know, and I will like lay it on them. And I had a couple friends that were like, I can't read comics anymore after that conversation. Or I'm not like they're leaving the industry, but it made them like really bummed out about it.
Right.
So I try to like, I've been more aware of that over the years, and I try to rein it in. Because I will have those like, listen, you want to hear the worst case scenarios across the board. You want to hear how hard this really can be. You want to hear how much the struggle can really be bad. Like you had a bad day. You want to hear about some bad days? Let's talk about it.
Right.
And they'll, what's funny is I was talking to another friend about this, and like, if you need to be uplifted in terms of like you want to feel better about comics, I love comics and we can talk about it all day long, but I'm definitely somebody that's like, you want to have like the real talk.
Right.
Let's have the real talk. And I will do that. But at the same time, be like, but listen, look how awesome these books are, you know? So I try to keep track of that. But all that comes from doing this for so long and seeing the ups and downs and seeing the ebb and flow of it. But you were talking about the 90s stuff. It's like so much came through the 90s. I was working at a store through all that.
Yeah.
You know, like I was working at a store when Marvel went bankrupt. And I remember going into work and being like, so am I out of a job? Like what's happening? And I was also a kid when that happened. So I'm very like Marvel's going bankrupt. This is over, right?
Yeah.
Like this is the end of the story. And then being like, no, comics are still coming out. This is what's happening. Yes, things suck, but everything's gonna be fine. And I was like, okay, good. I have no idea. I have no I'm a kid.
Yeah.
But I learned from those experiences. That's why some people are like, the sky is falling right now. I'm very like, listen, the sky could fall, but let's just doomsday prep. Let's not run around the street saying the sky is falling.
Right. Yeah, and so I was going to bring up Comics Pro because I did a podcast recently with Chris Sabella and Robert Wilson IV, and we were talking about, they went to Comics Pro, and
They're at the table, yeah.
So Robert described retailers in like the best way I've really heard them described. He said he called them partners.
Yep.
And I thought that was really smart because like I don't think a lot of people look at him like that. And you know, as much as people have a tendency of getting really dark when they talk about like the whole system and everything like that.
The system can be rough, but everyone's trying.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like you have to make your best efforts within the system. And like the retailers really are partners. And like that's why Comics Pro I think is such a good event because you get the face to face and you get to build those connections and everything like that.
Anytime you have an opportunity to sit down and talk to retailers, you should take it because they are going to they know what's really selling. They're there, they know what's up, and every retailer is different, and that's also part of the story, right? It's like, well, why is it different from you from this experience over here? That's also why I kind of love the table environment, the round tables, because you'll have 3 or 4 retailers, and one retailer will be like, I like this, and this is things I like, and the next retailer will be like, I don't like those things, I like this.
Right. Well, it's so diverse.
It is so diverse, and it's really an interesting experience to hear all those retailers and get that feedback and ask the questions, because you're right, like, or Robert is right, like they are 100% our partners,
right?
You know, and they want to make money too. Like everybody wants to. It's a weird thing where it's like the goal is to be happy, be creative, but also make money, right? Like I think those are the things that. And I think sometimes people act like that's impossible, but it's not. It's not. I mean, you look at Brian K. Vaughn's like entire career.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Yeah, he is kind of like the ideal for the whole setup.
Yeah, I love Brian K. Vaughan. We had I think about him a lot, especially his issue 1s. I think he writes great issue 1s. And Birthright is structured in a way that I was basically trying to write a Brian K. Vaughan issue. Same with Nailbiter to an extent, but more Birthright. And I've like Brian and I know each other, and we'll like occasionally talk to each other. But I think it's a thing, and I wonder how you think about this. There's when you've grown up reading comics like your entire life, and then you meet some of these creators, and you don't want to nerd out completely, but then sometimes you do. Sometimes you want to just be like, let's talk about it. I'm just going to be a nerd for a little bit. And Brian K. Vaughan was one at an Image party. I finally was just like, can I just like fawn over you for a second? Can we just like talk about this? But we talked about his issue 1 structures, and I was able to be like, hey, so this is what I think about issue 1s. This is what I think about how issue 1s tie into your solicit, your hook, your twist, and we had this whole conversation. And I told him my thoughts on Why the Last Man #1, which I think is one of the better #1s because you knew the premise going in, but it still hooks you. There's still a twist, but it's just emotional, and I was able to sit there and express my whole thoughts on issue 1, and I just like laid it out for him. And afterwards, he was all, "Yeah, that's exactly right." I was like, "I win,
crushed it." Well, you know, one other thing that I think is really impressive about his stuff is like, you know, there's a lot of talk about how like people write for the trade these days. All of his issues end kind of on a cliffhanger.
Yeah, so do mine.
Yeah, I mean, it's super smart because it's like it's encouraging people to keep picking up the single issues because you got to find out what's next, and also it works well in the trade because it just leads right into the next part, and you're like,
I am obsessed with last pages. Anytime someone comes to me like, I have an idea for a comic, I'm like, what? I always ask them, what's your last page of issue 1?
Yeah.
If you don't know, then I go back.
Yeah.
You know, when
it's got to be the hook.
Yeah.
The deep hook.
When I first met with Geoff to talk about Flash Rebirth stuff, and That was like the first guy. I remember he stood up to write on the wall because we really did. We really were like meeting regularly and sitting there and semi-regularly. I think I went down like 4 times. But sitting there and with a whiteboard and talking about the issues and going over everything. And when he started talking about rebirth, I was just like, "What's the last page, man? What's the last page?" He just looks at me and he's like, "I'm not telling you yet."
Yeah, that's hilarious.
I had dinner with Geoff years ago, and like 10 years ago, when Infinite Crisis was in the middle of coming out, and we were sitting there talking about Infinite Crisis and all this stuff, and it was in the middle of it. And we were just like talking about the story, and we were talking about the Countdown issue with Blue Beetle and everything. And he's like, "Do you want to know how it ends? Do you want me to just tell you how Infinite Crisis ends?" And I was like, no, I want to read it. But this time around, I was like, "Tell me everything." just lay it on me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I was talking about writing for trade and everything. And one thing I think is really interesting.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Not to go. No, well, I was going to go deep into some business stuff.
Please go ahead.
So I'm always really fascinated. I personally think that the medium is shifting a lot more towards like collected editions into like.
But I've been hearing that for like 15 years.
No, but
I've been hearing that forever, and I don't know.
You don't think so? Well, I mean, you haven't seen.
There's
that with
definitely
your own
an
work?
aspect
Have
of
you seen that
it
in your own work though, because it seems like creator owned. It's like, it's I don't know. I'm just curious.
I think you can do both.
No,
I think
I'm
it's
not-
about
I'm not-
options.
no, I'm
Oh,
just-
you mean the industry?
No, I mean you personally. Like, have you found that you're what 4 volumes into Nailbiter
Yeah, the
now?
issue volume 4 came out yesterday.
Yeah, so your 4th volume came out. Do you feel like readers are converting over to trades, or do you think that you still have like your dedicated single?
We still
issue?
have a good number of like once we hit. This is a business thing, so with the numbers, there's standard attrition,
Right.
And then I'm not sure if you've heard this term before, but there's the cliff, and we haven't hit our cliff. And usually you hit your cliff around many reasons, but the 2 I'm going to mention are either the people are dropping off, retailers realize people are dropping off, and they're like, "Oh, I'm ordering 20 when I should be ordering 5."
Right.
Or they're switching to trade.
Right.
Like those are 2 or 3 major factors involved in that. We never hit our cliff.
Yeah.
We've definitely had standard attrition. We haven't hit the cliff, and so yet, knock on.
Do you feel like every book hits the cliff, or I mean,
every book hits the cliff?
Really?
I would think. I mean,
I feel like there's an article here.
I would say one out of 5. I was gonna say 1 out of 10, but I'll go 1 out of 5. I'll add a book to it. Does not.
Yeah.
And actually, I might be even generous with that. But because there's 2 cliffs, right? There's issue 2 cliff, and then you kind of bounce back at 3 and 4 if you're doing well,
Right.
And then you kind of level out at that point, right? It's really what your numbers are like after issue 5. Whenever people go on about numbers and they're like, "Oh man, issue 1 sold so well.
Yeah.
This book is a hit," and you're like,
That
"You
doesn't
get to
really-
5,
yeah.
Get to 5, and let's have this conversation. Get to 6, and we'll talk about this. Get to 10."
Well, when I talk to retailers, they talk about it's really kind of after the first trade,
Yes.
And because then you see who's converting, and then you see who comes back for that next arc, and that's why not to make this. I always feel like I mention Brian K. Vaughan fan clubs on my podcast a lot because it feels like it turns into that sometimes.
That's all right. I don't mind that.
Yeah,
I like Brian K. Vaughan. We can talk about business stuff in Brian K. Vaughan. It's fine.
But his books quite often Saga obviously leapt up and has grown and stuff.
Yeah.
But books increasing in sales deep into the run is extremely rare, and I think a lot of people don't really realize that
Unless something happens.
unless Walking Dead.
Walking Dead.
Right.
Or a TV show or something like that, there's a bump. But then what happens is you have that initial bump for a little bit and then it levels out again. You always want to keep the level going. And you can get a little bump and then, I don't know, we can go deep into the economics of comics if you wanted to. We can talk about my whole apple cart theory on comics.
Oh, I got to hear your apple cart. Then
Okay,
no more
it's
economics.
really silly.
No, if it's anywhere near as good as Batman Returns, I do want to point out that I think it's hilarious that you started working at a comic shop in 1994, which I'm guessing is right around when you stopped running. Well, it's not right around when you stopped having tickets to convert to your retailer, but it is within the window. It's just
It's a few years.
I don't have tickets.
There's a few year time span. What happened was I was the annoying kid at the comic book store every Saturday, and the manager one day was like, "You want a job?
Yeah.
You want to just I need bags and boards. I need books put away." But I'm also trying to sell books. Can you do all this stuff? And I was like, hell yeah. So I put in a lot of years in making bags and boards, man.
Do you know Challenger's Comics and Conversation in
I do,
Chicago?
yeah.
So do you know the origin of theirs? So Patrick Brower he's a co-owner with W. Dahl Bush, and he was he was working at another shop, and he like there was this kid who was like always in there, and like he hired him to like do basically that.
Yeah.
That was W. Dahl Bush,
Ah,
and then eventually
okay.
they opened a shop together.
That's nice.
Which
No,
I think it's funny.
I almost opened a store in my early 20s. I had considered it. It was like a big part of the conversation. And actually, when I moved to Portland in 2008, I sold my entire comic book collection, which was like, I'm going to tell you this number. And it's going to freak you out. Maybe. I don't know. You might not be freaked out.
$14.
No. I had 100 long boxes.
Ooh.
And I had every DC Direct toy from the beginning until 2005.
Yeah.
Or actually, no, I would say 2000, 2003. And then I had a ton of just like stuff. Sold it all. Sold it all so I can go freelance and also pay for colorists. That was a big thing. Pay artists, pay colorists to make those books to start getting my career going.
Sure.
And then I moved to Portland and went freelance. But yeah, I sold everything. And so that was sort of like my shop for like a quick second. So for like beginning of 2008, from like January to April, I basically had a shop online and I just sold everything in those 4 months.
That's crazy.
And made enough that I was able to go freelance, basically.
I had the most long boxes anybody I know until then. I think I'm somewhere in like the 45 to 50 range. You crushed me. Totally crushed me.
I'm jealous sometimes too, because I'll hear stories about people who still have theirs.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, ugh, like I don't want to name names, but I know there's some creators that have a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. And I'm just like, man.
Okay,
like,
but before you get into the apple cart, I
Yeah.
have to bring up one thing that I thought was hilarious from the interview that Geoff Johns did for Rebirth. He talked about how God, what did he have? He's something like 20 or 15,000 or 27,000 comics.
He has a lot of comics, yeah.
But like he said that like 90% of them are DC. Do you think that's possible?
I'm gonna tell you something.
Yeah.
There's a reason why that is true. You're thinking of that as if he has been doing only those things.
He's
before.
probably getting
He's been getting them since.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I don't know if that's 100% true. That's my guess. I just know from what I know about Geoff that when I remember meeting him back in 2000, he was then, or 2001, he was then already like so embedded into DC. Remember, that guy's been exclusive at DC since like 2002.
When Stars and Stripe was what, like we were talking about like 99, 2000. And
I think it's 99.
so I think that was like his first big DC book. So
That was his first comic, yeah.
Yeah, it was his first comic. So like he's pretty much been, that's like.
Well, remember,
17 years.
there's that gap of like Thing, Avengers time period that he did, and then they grabbed him, and then once they grabbed him, you have to imagine that guy probably was just getting comics.
Yeah,
and he started being like, because he really does love DC Comics.
Oh,
like,
I believe
him
it.
and I have had conversations about. We talked about how that company is really important to me too. That's one of the reasons why I'm working on this stuff and investing a lot into it, because how important DC Comics is to me. It's very important to him, and I think once he started getting into that system, he was going back and buying stuff.
Yeah,
so you're talking about a guy who was like, "Oh, a run of this, I'll buy that." So I totally think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, no. I remember seeing that and I was just like, is that possible? Could that possibly be true? Anyways, apple cart.
Apple carts. I'm not even sure if I should tell you this theory. I tell this to creators sometimes when they get upset about issue ones. They get really like, I don't understand why they keep relaunching issue ones. Like, I don't understand this thing. I don't understand that. And I'm always like, all right, let me explain it to you like this. Let's say you and I,
right?
David, let's say you and I were both apple cart salesmen. We ride up and we sell apples, right? And you decide that you're just going to keep on. This is a horrible analogy, and people are going to rip it apart once I say it.
I'm so excited about it.
So let's say you and I are both apple cart salesmen, or we're selling apples. We have two different apple carts. We're selling apples.
I'm selling Red Delicious. You're selling Fuji.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I come up, and I'm just like, you and I, we've been doing this for a while, and we're basically neck and neck. Like you and I both sell an apple a day.
Right.
Right.
We have a horrible business model.
Yeah. Exactly. Horrible business model. We're selling an apple a day. Or let's even make it even worse. We're selling an apple a month. All right, we're selling an apple a month, one apple a month.
Okay.
Right? And then I'm like, you know what, man? I got an idea. I'm going to do something crazy. I'm going to do this crazy thing, and I'm going to basically, like, put number ones on all of these apples. I'm literally going to, like, put a sticker on it that's, like, special number one on all these apples. Number one apples.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's silly. I don't want to do that. I want to do that. And I'm like, yeah, I got this idea. And you're going to be like, well, here's my thing about that is I think that once you do that, it's going to get old fast, and people are going to go back, and you're going to still be selling one apple a month. I'm like, but I got to try something. So January comes around, I do it, and I sell 10 apples that month instead of my one, and you still sell one. But the next day, let's say the next month, I'm back down to selling one apple. And you're like, yeah, see, I told you. But at the end of the year, I still have way more apples than you.
Yeah. 9 more for that 1 month.
9 more for that 1 month. And that meant that I was able to the following year. Yeah, like after the rest of the year, you and I were neck and neck, each selling one apple. And you were right. I dropped back down to one apple, right? But I was able to do more. I was able to buy another cart. I was able to do a couple things differently because I had sold those extra apples.
Right.
I think people forget that in comics when they complain about a lot of stuff. It's like the reason why these companies, sometimes they'll drop down. The worst thing is if it drops below.
Right.
If it drops below, if all of a sudden I did that stunt and now I'm selling no apples,
Right.
then there's a problem.
That's
But
like
never
the jumping off point theory.
That's a jumping off theory, yeah. But usually that isn't the case.
Right.
You know? It is sort of ebb and flow. I mean, if I sat there and looked at a chart and I was able to do this when you're running it as a business and you are a publisher and you have multiple people underneath it, you're responsible not only for these books, but these people's like livelihoods. And somebody comes to you and they're like, here's your option. I'm not saying this happens.
Sure.
But let's say it did. Somebody comes to you and says, this year we had to make a certain amount or we had to lay people off.
Right.
You can do everything you can to make that amount.
Sure.
And I think that's what people forget sometimes when I read some stuff about comics and the industry of it. I'm always like, you have to understand that these people are under a lot of pressure to sell books. And you have to find ways of doing it. There's constructive ways of doing it, and there are ways that are sort of challenging and are dangerous. But when you're in that position, you got to figure it out. And the thing that always bugs me about all of that, you have to never lose sight of the most important part.
Tell the story.
Make good books. Yeah, tell the story. If you lose sight of that, then there's a problem.
Right.
But everything else, you gotta just sell apples, man. You gotta sell apples, and if I can find a way to sell a few more apples than you, I'm gonna take it.
I've talked to Eric Stevenson a lot over the years on like interviews and stuff like that. And typically when I ask him like look at market share, like how's your performance and everything, and like ultimately I'm like when I ask him like how are you gonna like take it to the next level, he's just like keep making good comics.
Exactly. That is really the biggest thing you need to do. I mean, as much as I talk about putting a sticker on the book, it's like if my apples aren't good, then it's not going to matter.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you totally dominate because Fuji's are better than Red Delicious.
Yeah, all right. We get Fuji's all the time in my house. So.
I also want to point out, like, one of my favorite things from the past few years was when Jim Zub did the Skull Kickers #1s for 5 weeks.
Yeah,
and like that actually worked. It worked, and afterwards it went back down to the normal level. He kept his normal readers, but
he might have gotten people to discover it, and that's the thing about. Like I love single issues. Like I still like getting them.
Yeah, me too.
But it's part of why when we talk about the conversation of things leaning in toward the graphic novel department or book market more and more, to me the single issues are advertising. I call them single issues. I don't call them pamphlets for the trade, but I do think they're advertising. It is something coming out monthly that reminds people this book exists.
Right.
And you have to keep doing that. Something that Jim did was Jim had Skull Kickers coming out regularly, but he realized I need something that's different to excite people again, to get people out in people's faces, because it is hard once you get into the 20s, 30s, 40s.
Right.
That was one of the big things at Comics Pro last year was we were gearing up for issue 11 of Nailbiter, and I was like, how do I sell you an 11?
Right.
I've sold you a 1. How do I sell you an 11? And now how do I sell you a 21? It can be challenging, whatever you got to do. But as long as you keep sight of the most important part, you can do all those different things. But those feed into your trade.
Right.
And then people that might not buy those single issues, but every time they go into the store, whether it's monthly, every 2-3 months, they see a new visual image of that book because you're constantly producing covers. You're constantly producing, a monthly thing.
Well, and like especially today where like I did a retailer survey like last year, and one of the things that people brought up, like I was expecting people were going to mention, Comixology, digital comics in general, like things like that, Amazon as like their main competitors. They were talking about like Netflix. Because it's almost a battle of attrition in time too. It's not just.
It is. I'm always really curious about that. The everything else answer.
Right.
I'm always curious about that. About how much weight that actually has.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the one thing that it does reflect is the fact you were talking about basically top of mind awareness. You're talking about like those pamphlets or floppies or single issues or comics, whatever. Are like the monthly reminder, but it's like what happens if something breaks that cycle, like either being late or like I just instead of buying Daredevil this month, I'm going to watch Daredevil season 2 on Netflix, and then you don't go to the shop because you're living in a dark room watching on your couch, which I did recently.
I haven't watched season 2 yet, but because I was too busy making comic books. There was a moment recently where I was like, I am still reading comics, but I can't enjoy all the other little comic book stuff because I'm too busy making trying to make the books. I mean, it's tough. There's no way to measure that completely to see if that's actually what's happening.
It's impossible. I mean, that's the thing with all this stuff. I mean, like even like the biggest publishers don't really do market research, or they don't say that they do market research, or they don't reveal that they do. I hope they do.
They do to an extent. I think they pay way more attention than any of us realize. But I think that's important. I think I like a certain level of transparency in comics, but I understand not advertising everything you do.
I totally do.
Like I know there are certain things that publishers do they don't talk about, or they're very aware of, or they will be transparent with their creators about, but they're not completely, You know, and if you
I
pay
don't blame
attention, you
them.
can see it. If you really like what you do, you actually are looking at the numbers. I look at the numbers every month, dude, like across the board. I actually sit there and I look at everything and I read the reports and I read your guys' stuff. And I try to pay attention to it, but there are times I'm surprised by like, oh, they do that. Interesting. I didn't know they do that. And there are things that you hope they would do. It's funny. There is a certain level of transparency, but I think it's interesting when people are like, oh, publishers should do this. And you're like, they do that. They just don't tell you they do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, I think that goes across the board in a lot of stuff. Like, I know you're a basketball fan, and a lot of like basketball teams, like people talk about like the Lakers or something like that being this like trash farm these days because they're like record losses for them. But I mean, like, and they were talking about how they like need to embrace analytics and doing stuff like that. Lakers have one of the best analytics programs out of any team. Like they're putting millions of dollars into that stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's just like I think a lot of times people want quick answers, but like they have no reason to share these things with people.
Yeah.
I don't blame them. But so get back to your stuff.
Yeah, sorry.
We can go all over the place.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to ask about your Birthright artist, Andre
Yeah,
Bresson.
Andre is the best.
He like
Maniac.
That's one of the things that I'm always really excited about creator-owned comics is like I feel like a lot of creator-owned comics introduced me to artists I'd never experienced before that really blow me away. But Andre was one that like I'd never even like heard of him before. Where did he come from?
He was a DC artist.
Was he?
He's a DC artist. He was doing like Green Lantern stuff. I think he was doing Red Lanterns for a little bit. He was in a system with a bunch of other artists because there's different art studios and stuff, and so he's kind of like in one of those studio systems. And so he was filling in for a lot of guys. So you have a lot of different artists, and he would kind of come in. I don't remember exact names. I don't want to quote anybody and then be told I got it wrong.
Sure.
But I know he would fill for certain people, and he would do like a couple of artists, but he would mimic those artists. And he had this DeviantArt that was just like crazy fantasy stuff. And we talked to so many people about Birthright.
Yeah.
I mean, there were so many artists we talked to. It took forever to find the right person. I mean, you'd be surprised how hard it is to find an artist sometimes. Like, it can be really challenging.
Well, I mean, like, I remember somebody saying one time, I don't know who said it originally, but it was like, you give 10 artists one, page of script, and they're going to draw it 10 different ways.
Yes, for sure. And so Sean Makowitz, who's my editor at Skybound, he was like, there's this guy, I really liked working with him. It never clicked for some reason at DC. I know people kind of want to figure something out for him, but it just never clicks. What do you think? And I went to his art page and I looked at it and I was just like, okay, let's go with this guy. Like, let's see if we can work together. And I mean, the guy's a genius, and we work really well together. He's an extremely generous creator. He's awesome. I don't know, man. He's crazy though. Yeah. I tell you, he'll send us these emails, and he knows I talk about this all the time about how crazy he is. Like, he's a maniac, and so he will give me. He'll give me like thoughts on things. It's so funny. Like, we'll be talking about something and he'll just be like, this is my thought press on this. And he'll just like go off about it. And it works really well. Like, so in Birthright, there's the mom character, Wendy. In the first issue, she has a hairpin. And if you look at her hairpin, it's actually a pair of silver wings. And Andre was like, I did that because I wanted to begin to show the association between the two mother characters. You have Wendy, the mother character, and she is already tied in visually with the other mother character who actually has metal wings. And he like break it all down. I was like, man, you are a maniac. And there's all kinds of stuff like that. There's all kinds of weird little visuals, which made it really good because he actually got the kind of storytelling I like to do, where I like doing weird little visual cues, and I'm like, people may never figure this out.
Right.
There's things in... there's things in Captain Midnight I was doing, things in Ghosted. Like in Ghosted, a big part of the story of Ghosted, spoilers if you haven't read it, is about how the main character, Jackson, has been watched by Death. Like, he basically Death has an interest in him for some reason. And I kept telling people, I'm like, listen, there's a clue in the first issue this whole book is going to be about. We don't reveal that he's actually being watched by Death until like, in the late teen issues. But if you go back and you look at the last page of issue 1, when we show the ghost for the first time, the Grim Reaper's standing right behind him. Like, right behind him. I'm like, it was there all along, but I didn't like, there wasn't an arrow pointing at him. And I do that a lot of those books. And even with Flash, I'm doing other little things in Flash that we're going to be queuing up for much later. Andre is great for that. He really gets it. He really understands it. You just got to tell him and be like, this is what I'm thinking about doing. What are you thinking about doing? And he'll just be like, here's my thoughts on it. And he'll give these like long emails back about it. And I'm like, I'll just write back really quickly, yes. Because I'm intimidated by long emails. So, long emails terrify me.
Oh, man, you must hate my emails. Because
No, you are not a long email writer, buddy, let me tell you.
Well, I guess it depends on what is a long email?
Dude, I get some bricks from some people. Man, it's rough. If I see a long email, it will take forever for me to answer it. Like, I'll just be like, oh God, it means I gotta write a long email back. You know, I don't remember who said it. There was a writer who said, like, at the end of a letter, he apologized. He didn't have time to make it shorter. You know, I can't remember who that writer was. I feel like that all the time. Especially with emails, I'm like, if I had more time, I would edit this email down, but here, whatever. But he'll write these long emails, or he'll write these documents up, and he'll have these thoughts, and he'll give us sketches, and he'll be like, I have this idea for this, and I'm thinking about this, and it ties into these things, and you know, here's this story idea for Mikey, and it comes from this. Like, we're gonna do this visual thing, and these are my thoughts on how to, like, you know, manipulate the reader, because I'm really into trying to guide and manipulate the reader through a story, and he's really all about that. But yeah, he's a maniac.
I think one of the interesting things though is like you know, like there's so many comic sites today, and like a lot of people analyzing like work and everything like that. And I think one of the things that is so interesting about art is how much, like, you're talking about like the hairpin and everything.
Yeah.
Like that's something that no one, like, if you did notice it, you could attribute it to you. Like it could be something that like you could think it was something that was in the script, and it's like,
yeah,
it's interesting because it's sometimes hard to attribute, like there's an attribution issue almost in the creative process.
But at that point, it becomes both. Like, I knew it, we talked about it. Then it becomes, that's why so my process of writing, I try to do this. My process of writing is I will write the script, and depending on who the creator is, I write for that, you know, that artist, obviously. Right. Like with Mike, with Nailbiter, I write a much looser script, mostly because we talk all the time. He lives like 5 minutes from my house, so we talk a lot. Some creators are more heavy on the script side, but I like, my favorite stage is getting the roughs and talking about the roughs with the artist, and that's when we're collaborating. That's when we're really like, you know, the mind meld of these books. And then after that, I'm very like, once the roughs are over, I'm like, this is your now.
Yeah.
Like, you know, raise this baby on your own.
Make
now.
it beautiful.
You know, you're a single parent. Go to it. And at that point, you know, you get, you know, this beautiful work back. You get their imagination back at you. So with the attribution thing, I think it can be tough, right?
Right.
It is interesting. Like, I'll read. It's funny. I used to read reviews, and now I don't. And my reasoning for not reading reviews, you're not supposed to. I think you shouldn't.
No,
it's really weird.
It's hard not to, though.
You should, sort of, because I think that, you know, there is definitely
you can learn
value
stuff
there.
theoretically.
Yeah, there is value there. But my thing, I think, was more time, actually, than anything else. But I read a review of a really early issue of Nailbiter, and everything, they were just like, there was a huge chunk about Mike and Mike's ideas and Mike being a genius for this stuff. And I was like, those are all my ideas. But I had this moment of like, but you know what? Mike executed it. And like, regardless of, he took my legit abstract idea that is just a thought, and he executed it. Like, he should get credit for it. Right. You know? So, yeah. Well, but the crediting the writer thing for anything in the art is always a little silly.
Well, I think like the best term or the best phrase I've heard for it is Kieran Gillen and Jamie McKelvey. I don't know if Kieran wrote it or if they wrote it together or whatever, but there was like this write-up they did about their creative process. And they talked about how they're a faux cartoonist. And like how like they kind of form together and become like, you know, cartoonists, like writer artists, and like and I think that's kind of a perfect way when you especially today, and especially on creator-owned books where you're working very closely together. Yeah, you really do. It's you kind of have to like attribute. I try to attribute like everything to everyone more or less.
Yeah, because the colorist adds to it, the lettering adds to it. Like, I'm so thankful that I have good letters I work with, because I lettered my comics for a long time, and I almost lettered. There is actually a version of issue 1 of Nailbiter that I lettered. Like PDF printed out, you know, never saw print. But like, once John came in, John just took what I did and made it a million times better. Yeah. And it's just like, I'm thankful for John every day. Letters are the best, man. They tell the story too.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, you look at like, you know, one book I really love is, do you read Tooth and Claw? Or like,
excuse me, Autumn Lands.
Yes. I did it.
You mean the 90s book Tooth and Claw, or do you mean Autumn Lands? Yes, Autumn Lands.
I mean, you got like John Rochelle on there, and that dude is amazing. Yeah. Like any of the Comic Craft crews, like, insane.
Yeah, that's some stylistic lettering. It's so clean and good, but yeah.
But so, all right. So last question. I know you have like stuff to do, but
I'll go to my room and I'm going to work.
Okay, exactly. Go write 56 scripts before the con starts.
I got to finish one. So yeah.
Okay. So the Flash is coming. I'm a big Flash fan. Let's just say theoretically, I am skeptical about you and Carmine and Neil doing the Flash. What is your Flash? Why is it a Flash? The Flash book for Flash fans and non-Flash fans.
It's hard to talk about this sometimes because it is such a personal book to me. Yeah. You know, I feel like I'm so deep and tight into it that I'm like, my answer is long. You know, like, you have an hour.
Your emails.
Yeah, exactly. You have an hour. You can talk about the Flash. I think, obviously, we've shown I'm a huge Flash fan. And, you know, the story is about
He's wearing a Flash shirt right now while we're talking.
You know, the thing about Barry Allen is a hero, you know, and to me, Barry Allen is this hero who always races into danger, but he smiles while he's doing it. You know, he is there to help people, and I think he's always had this desire to be a mentor and to teach people. You have to think about, you know, if we go to pre-52, pre-crisis, Barry Allen was a guy who trained Wally West, and Wally West became the Flash at some point and became, you know, the sidekick character that, you know, fulfilled the legacy and became the hero, right? And became that hero. With this, you know, post-52 world, you have Barry Allen who has never done that.
Right.
You know, he hasn't had that experience. And I always thought about how Barry Allen was a great teacher. He was a good mentor. I want to show that again, but show on a bigger scale. When I started working on the book, one of the things, you know, I've been thinking about this idea for the last year, and it actually originated from an early idea I had where I was like, no more speedsters, only Barry Allen.
So were you bringing in Scarlet Witch for this?
But that was one of my notes. It was a big note I had at the beginning of one of my notebooks was no more speedsters. And I started working on it, and I was like, no, go the opposite. Like, the no more speedsters thing is the obvious thing right now. Let's go crazy.
Yeah.
Let's get them all in there.
I do think one of the interesting things about it is like you could make the argument that having a bunch of speedsters will make speedsters less special. But at the same time, like you can make it special by making him the trainer of him and like playing into that role of the character.
That is a part of Barry Allen's thought process is the powers don't make him a hero, man.
Yeah, it's true.
Barry Allen is a hero because he is a hero.
Well, and that's why you have Godspeed, like the evil juxtaposition.
Is he evil?
Is he evil?
Is he evil? There's two kinds of villains, right? There's the opposite and there's the mirror.
Yeah.
Which one is Godspeed? Is he the opposite?
I don't know.
Is he the reverse?
I'll have to read to
or
find out.
Is he the mirror?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm very interested to find out. But I think it's really exciting that you're getting to do something that you've loved since you were a kid.
Oh man, yeah, it's really surreal. I don't think it's real. Let me tell you how I found out I got let me go into the Carmine thing. So Carmine, he is amazing also. Like he brings
I'm horrible.
Oh, it's Carmine.
Carmine, okay.
Carmine. So Carmine, I thought it was Carmine, but it's Carmine. It's Italian. He is so energetic, you know, and so excited, and you can see that excitement in the work. Like his pages are crazy. There's like just so much energy going on and flow to it, and the way he draws the flash and the lightning is awesome, and the way he's been designing the characters, and you saw the Godspeed design. He's done a lot of really cool stuff with it. I'm really excited for people to see it. It's I don't know. It's gonna be a good looking book. I don't know. Knock on wood. I hope people like it. I'm putting a lot of myself into this, and I'm really trying to make it this book that I think a Flash fan would like. But at the same time, like I'm not an idiot. I want to make sure somebody's coming into it and is like, I know nothing of the Flash, can still read it. You know, they can still go, here are the beats I need to know about this character. Now let's get to the cool stuff. Let's get to the emotion. Let's get to the stuff that, you know, why I love the Flash. I'm trying to show you what I love about the Flash, and I'm hoping that it comes across.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure. Well, when is the first issue dropping in June?
June 8th. June 8th is the Rebirth issue, and then 2 weeks later you get the issue 1.
Okay.
And the Rebirth issue, I'm not really allowed to talk about it, but the Rebirth issue ties directly into a DC Universe Rebirth.
Ooh.
Like they're very, very connected. But to the point, that's why I can't talk about it. Jeff would kill me. So,
well, we don't want that.
No.
That would be very bad. All right. Well, thank you so much for chatting
man.
with me, and I hope you have a good rest of your con.
Yeah, you too, dude. Go to my room and work.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel from Sketch.com. You can find this week's guest, Joshua Williamson, on Twitter at @Williamson_Josh, and his work in Nailbiter, Birthright, and the upcoming rebirth of The Flash at DC Comics. You can find more sketch content at Sketched. That's SKTCHD.com. Follow us on Twitter at @SketchComic. Like us on Facebook at /Sketched. And if you're an iTunes listener, give the show a rating or review. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another couple episodes from Emerald City ComiCon.